Today's Worship Associate. Today is our June 30th, 2024 service. Welcome this day, this morning, and this opportunity to be together in community. I have a couple announcements. We will be having Joys and Concerns after the flower ceremony, so there's a basket over there, or leave it in the chat box if you're online. Let's see. We will not be having services in July, so you'll have to wait till August. And in August, we're going to try a bit different, something we used to do long ago, of having some forums instead of the regular service. But then we'll have be back to having regular services in September, forums in August, and no service in July. Grab a flower if you haven't already during community greeting. Let's see, what else do we have? Men's group will be on July 12th at Bill Beach's house in Firth. Some more information. Jim Sathy's organizing that. It can be emailed or talk to me. Women's group I don't think was happening this July. And now for our community greeting. So get up and meet people.
Kind of dry this morning.
As I ring the peace bowl 3 times, take deep breaths and relax so we can move into worship. For this moment in time, let go of your anxieties, fears, and worries. Be in this moment. We will now read our church covenant. It's printed in the order of service, so if you feel free to read along with me, us. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We'll now be lighting our chalice. We gather this hour as people of faith, joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, a sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning comes from William Ellery Channing, who's one of the important figures in the history of our Unitarian tradition, and this dates to probably the 1820s, I think. I call that mind free which masters the senses and which recognizes its own reality and greatness, which passes life not in asking what it shall eat or drink, but in hungering, thirsting, and seeking after righteousness. I call that mind free which jealously guards its intellectual rights and powers, which does not content itself with a passive or hereditary faith, which opens itself to light whencesoever it may come, which receives new truth as an angel from heaven. I call that mind free which is not passively framed by outward circumstances and is not the creature of accidental impulse, which discovers everywhere the radiant signatures of the infinite Spirit and in them finds help to its own spiritual enlargement. I call that mind free which protects itself against the usurpations of society and which does not cower to human opinion, which refuses to be the slave or tool of the many or of the few, and guards its empire over itself as nobler than the empire of the world. I call that mind free which resists the bondage of habit, which does not mechanically copy the past nor live on its old virtues, but which listens for new and higher monitions of conscience and rejoices to pour itself forth in fresh and higher exertions. I call that mind free which sets no bounds to its love, which, wherever they are seen, delights in virtue and sympathizes with suffering, which recognizes in all human beings the image of God and the rights of God's children, and offers itself up, a willing sacrifice to the cause of humankind. I call that mind free which has cast off all fear but that of wrongdoing, and which no menace or peril can enthrall, which is calm in the midst of tumults and possesses itself though all else be lost. I invite you now to join in singing our opening hymn, number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In.
Today will be a terrible day. Enter Good morning, everybody. This morning I'm going to read a short story about the flower ceremony. It's a plain and simple beauty, but it is definitely beautiful with my helper. The story is adapted from a tale by Janine K. Grossmeyer. Now, in the city of Prague, in the land of Czechoslovakia, in the year 1923, there was a church. But the building did not look much like a church. It had no bells, no spires, no stained glass windows. It had no organ to make beautiful music. It didn't even have a piano. It had no carvings of wood or statues of stone. It had no candles or chalices. It had no flowers. The church did have some things. It had 4 walls and a ceiling and a floor. It had a door and a few windows. It had some wooden chairs, but that was all, plain and simple. Except the church also had people who came to it every Sunday. It had a minister, and his name was Norbert Čapek. He had been the minister at the plain and simple church for 2 years. Every Sunday, Minister Čapek went to church, and he spoke to the people while they listened, sitting quietly and still in those hard wooden chairs. I'm glad we have soft, comfortable pews. When he was done speaking, the people talked a little bit amongst themselves, and then they went home. And that was all. No music, no candles, no food. Not even coffee or cookies. No food. Springtime came to the city of Prague, and Norbert Čapek went out for a stroll. The rains had come, and the birds were singing, and flowers were blooming all over the land. The world was beautiful. Then an idea came to him, simple and clear, plain as day. The next Sunday, he asked all the people in the church to bring a flower or a budding branch or even a twig. Each person was to bring one. What kind? They asked. What color? What size? You choose, he said. Each of you choose what you like. And so, on the next Sunday, which was the very first day of summer, the people came with flowers of all different colors and sizes and kinds. There were yellow daisies and red roses. There were white lilies and blue asters, dark-eyed pansies and light green leaves. Pink and purple, orange and gold. There were all those colors and more. Flowers filled all the vases, and the church, it wasn't so plain and simple anymore. Minister Čapek spoke to the people while they listened, sitting quiet and still in those hard wooden chairs. These flowers are like ourselves, he said. Different colors and different shapes and different sizes, each needing different kind of care, but each beautiful, each important and special, each in its own way. When he was done speaking, the people talked a little bit among themselves, and then they each chose a different flower from the vases before they went home. And that was all. And it was beautiful and plain and simple as the day. So, all these pages. At this time, we ask you to place your flower in our community vase. As Jessica plays some nice music, and when you leave at the end of our service, please take a different flower with you. And And you can place yours on the table, and then we'll go upstairs. Okay. So, here we are.
This is a special time in our congregations where each of us has an opportunity to share major events in our lives, our joys, our concerns, and our sorrows, so we can all be uplifted by the UU community. As I read the sorrows, concerns, and joys that have been given us, the minister will light a candle. We have a joy from Catherine for our two new visitors, Kinley and Rachel. Vic, any others? Okay. We light one more candle for all those sorrows, concerns, and joys we hold in our hearts and are not ready to share at this time. Know we lift up our love for you, and we are all in this together.
Well, our reading this morning is going to be a little bit on the dry side, I admit, because it's the language of the new Article 2 changes as adopted on June 22nd, 2024. I think it'll help make my sermon a lot more understandable to hear what the language sounds like to begin with. So section C 2.1, purposes. The Unitarian Universalist Association will devote its resources to and use its organizational powers for religious, educational, and humanitarian purposes. Its primary purposes are to assist congregations in their vital ministries, to support and train leaders, both lay and professional, to foster lifelong faith formation and spiritual development, to heal historic injustices, to support and encourage the creation of new Unitarian Universalist communities, and to advance our Unitarian Universalist values in the world. The Unitarian Universalist Association will actively engage its members in the transformation of the world through liberating love. C 2.2, values and covenant. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant congregation to congregation and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Inseparable from one another, these shared values are interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. With reverence for the great web of life and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. We covenant to protect earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships. Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive, democratic processes to make decisions within our congregations, our association, and society at large. Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us one to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. Equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. Section C 2.3, Inspirations. Direct experiences of transcending mystery and wonder are primary sources of Unitarian Universalist inspiration. These experiences open our hearts, renew our spirits, and transform our lives. We draw upon and are inspired by sacred, secular, and scientific understandings that help us make meaning and live into our values. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which these sources were created and are currently practiced. Grateful for the experiences that move us, aware of the religious ancestries we inherit, and enlivened by the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. Section C 2.4, Inclusion. Systems of power, privilege, and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association of congregations that truly welcome all persons who share our values. We commit to being an association of congregations that empowers and enhances everyone's participation, especially those with historically marginalized identities. Section C 2.5, Freedom of Belief. Congregational freedom and the individual's right of conscience are central to our Unitarian Universalist heritage. Congregations may establish statements of purpose, covenants, and bonds of union, so long as they do not require that members adhere to a particular creed. Now, an offering to support the ministry of this church will now be given and gratefully received. past years, the final Sunday worship service before our summer break has usually occurred during our annual General Assembly of our denomination. So our final service of the year has often been the live stream Sunday morning worship service that caps off that meeting. This year, that service happened on the 23rd, and we had one more Sunday service today before the July break. So I thought it would be good to use the occasion to reflect on my impressions about our General Assembly and what it might indicate about the future of our faith. If you're visiting us today, this is a little more, sausage making than you would see in most of our Sunday services, but it's a good primer on a little bit about what we believe and how we come together as Unitarian Universalists. If you've ever attended a General Assembly, either in person or online, you know that most of what goes on during the course of a few days is much more about the business of the denomination than anything that feels spiritual or religious. But there are special worship services that are wonderful to attend, some highlighting ministerial formation, and services that celebrate the youth bridging into young adulthood, for example. I would encourage everyone to attend our General Assembly at least once if you have the chance, especially on a year that it is in person. This year it was virtual. You can really come away jazzed with enthusiasm about being a Unitarian Universalist, especially when you have the unique opportunity to attend a worship service with thousands of fellow Unitarian Universalists. This year our General Assembly was entirely online, but it was nevertheless an important moment in the story of our faith. This year, the delegates from congregations across the country voted overwhelmingly to adopt the new language in Article 2 of our bylaws, which I read to you, which describes the purpose of our association and the shared values that define our Unitarian Universalist faith. There were other important ballot measures as well, and I'll talk a little about in a few minutes, but this was by far the most important decision we have made in recent years. It was the culmination of a lengthy process of analysis and revision that is mandated to happen every 15 years, according to our bylaws. The current process began in 2020 with the appointment of an Article 2 study commission tasked with evaluating the language based on our shared values. And the commission initially solicited input from UUs of all stripes in drafting their proposed revision. At last year's General Assembly, the draft of the proposed changes were voted forward for further discussion and amendments according to procedure. This year, the final amendments were approved, and the new language was adopted by a margin of 80.2% in favor and 19.8% opposed. A 2/3 threshold was required for it to pass, so this was easily exceeded. The vote was from 2,757 delegates, representing 734 congregations from all 50 states and Washington, D.C. It is refreshing to see such a broad representation, thanks in large part to the virtual option we now have for all General Assemblies, whether they are in person or not. Roughly 700 non-delegate UUs also attended this year. And whether you were in favor or opposed to the revised language, this was a very big deal. As the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, commented, this is a historic moment for Unitarian Universalism as we move our living tradition forward to focus on shared values that will help promote liberation, radical inclusion, and communal care both within our church and across society. I am so proud of the work that our congregations, volunteers, UUA staff, and especially individual UUs have put in throughout this discernment process. It demonstrates how functioning democratic processes can be used to create change that is just and equitable. The new language in Article 2 replaces the 7 principles and 6 sources language in our bylaws, which were most recently revised in 1987 with a list of 6 shared values centered on love. A graphic depiction of this is on your order of service this morning. Many of us have cherished the 7 principles, which are a pretty good set of values to live by, and it is understandable that you may feel anxious about the new language for various reasons. Change can be uncomfortable, especially when it involves something fundamental about our religious identity. But take comfort that since we are an association of independent congregations, we are free to still use and display the 7 principles however we wish. The new statement of 6 shared values is now the official language of our denominational bylaws, though, so it is expected that congregations will begin to embrace the change going forward and promote the new language. It is still important to remember that, as the bylaws remind us, congregational freedom and the individual's right of conscience are central to our Unitarian Universalist heritage. So you will never be forced to profess a new shared values of some kind of creed. I doubt anyone who finds a home in our faith would take issue with the values in general, but some may not care for the chosen language. The graphic representation of the shared values is already being called a daisy or other flower, and some UU artists have created imaginative depictions as such. And if you're so inclined, there is even an acronym spreading throughout the UU culture to help you remember the 6 shared values. JETPIG. It stands for Justice, Equity, Transformation, Pluralism, Interdependence, and Generosity. JETPIG. As you can guess, there are already flying JETPIG images on the internet, and even a few JETPIG songs you can look up on YouTube. Some people really like JETPIG, but others just find it silly. Consider yourselves informed and warned. Our faith is called a living tradition for a reason. Just as life forms evolve through adaptation to changing ecological conditions, our faith evolves and adapts to a world in a constant state of change. We question everything, and we engage in a healthy, democratic process of discernment, self-examination, and debate. Though we respect the tradition and wisdom passed down to us from generations of ancestors, we do not remain attached to sacred doctrines, texts, sacraments, or dogma the way some other faiths do. I think that makes us stronger and helps us remain relevant in an age when many people are losing interest in organized religion altogether. It may be comforting for some folks to cling to beliefs that are increasingly unscientific and difficult to reconcile with modern reality. But more and more people across the planet are walking away from religious affiliation because they have only experienced religion as something that requires them to profess beliefs that strain credulity. Even among so-called Christian nationalists, it is far more about the nationalism and defining the other to be despised than it is about anything resembling Christian beliefs or practices. I firmly believe that the inclination to spirituality is an inherent part of being human. So I think expressing our innate spirituality through some form of religion will always be part of human society. It is one reason I'm optimistic about the future growth of our faith, a religion that is centered on the real world and willing to evolve if we can only let more people know he exists. I know there are hordes of hurting people with unfulfilled spiritual longings that would find us to be the diverse and welcoming religious community of their dreams. If you want more information about the new Article 2 language, I refer you to the UA.org website or the many articles about this that are sure to follow. You can expect also much more values, flower art, and jet pig graphics will follow too. I doubt it will be long before plush jet pigs will be on sale at the UUA bookstore, so stay tuned. I also want to highlight a few more items from General Assembly that I think are important. The first, which I think is extremely relevant in America right now, and especially in Idaho, is the business resolution we approved titled, "Embracing Transgender, Non-Binary, and Intersex People is a Fundamental Expression of UU Religious Values." It was approved by a margin of 92%. In a time when the human rights and dignity of LGBTQ plus folks are being threatened at the national and state level at an alarming rate, the resolution clearly states our denomination's support for transgender, non-binary, and intersex people. As an article in the UU World magazine describes, business resolutions are one mechanism by which UUs express their religious beliefs, and once passed, require the UUA to implement as part of the association's work. In addition to articulating theological reasons for supporting the rights of transgender, non-binary, and intersex people, the resolution also enumerates ways that UUs can actively work to further this goal. Most of you are probably aware of the hundreds of so-called bathroom bills, sanctity of women's sports bills, and other legislation restricting gender-affirming care for transgender people that are popular red meat legislation for right-wing politicians these days. And you may have heard some politicians promise to essentially erase transgender, non-binary, and intersex people by attempting to legally define gender as male or female at birth. This is blatantly against our values, which respect the inherent worth and dignity of all people. So I think it is good that we made a bold and specific statement of support in these critical times. Let there be no ambiguity. As it states in the resolution, our religious tradition is a living one, and today we collectively declare that our covenant inescapably binds us to affirmation and protection of our transgender and intersex members and kindred in faith and in practice. There are two other items I want to highlight, and then I will open up the floor for questions and discussion. They're both related to the Israel-Palestine conflict in Gaza, and I was glad to see Unitarian Universalists becoming less one-sided on this controversial topic. In the past, we have been very supportive of the Jewish people and the creation of the modern state of Israel after the horror of the Holocaust. And as a denomination, we have not approved resolutions that were critical of Israel for the treatment of Palestinians, such as one offered a few years ago that called for the association to divest from companies that were profiting from the Israeli military infrastructure in the West Bank. This year, we passed two related items. The first was an action of immediate witness titled Solidarity with Palestinians that calls on UU congregations to witness, educate, and advocate on behalf of the Palestinian people suffering in Gaza. It decries the violence committed by Hamas, but it also recognizes the overwhelming violence perpetrated by the Israeli military, which is still ongoing. It was approved by a 74% majority. In UU terminology, an action of immediate witness, or AIW, is a statement of purpose of support of an urgent justice issue that the denomination agrees should be addressed by whatever means we can. It is intended to raise awareness and trigger action. As someone who has been to Israel-Palestine, who has spoken to people on both sides, and who has witnessed what is essentially an apartheid state firsthand, I have been appalled to hear some liberal and conservative politicians dismiss student protesters with incredibly arrogant and ignorant statements, and more importantly, dismiss the tragic suffering of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. No matter what happened on October 7th, which was horrible, it does not justify the indiscriminate killing of tens of thousands of Palestinians, especially thousands of innocent children. I'm very proud that our delegates supported this AIW. The related item was a so-called responsive resolution titled UUA General Assembly Support for October 7 Hostages. A responsive resolution in UU terms is just that. A resolution voted on by the delegates in response to another item during the meeting. In this case, it was a response to the AIW supporting Palestinians, and it called out the disturbing rise in anti-Semitism in America, as well as being sensitive to the feelings of the large number of Jewish UUs who have experienced anti-Semitism firsthand. The conclusion of this short responsive resolution, which was approved by 77% majority, states, "Be it resolved that the General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association calls for the immediate release of all Hamas-held hostages. Further, the GA of the UUA acknowledges the real suffering of Jews within our association and beyond. There can be no peace and no justice unless it is for all people." I have been attending General Assemblies for the last 18 years, and this is the first time I have seen our denomination thread the needle so well on the controversial subject of Israel-Palestine. We have always had advocates who felt strongly about both sides of the conflict and spoke about peace, but we have too often been timid about officially criticizing the actions of the Israeli government for fear of coming across as anti-Semitic. I think the undeniable tragedy of Gaza has helped us evolve to a more clear-eyed perspective, along with many other people in the world. Our denominational statements may seem like we're just screaming into a hurricane, but it is important that we raise awareness and show our support however we can. I hope the killing will end soon and a viable two-state solution can be found. But the extremists on both sides of the conflict will be hard to pacify. So these are just a few highlights of the kinds of things that happen at our annual General Assembly. There is much more information about it on the UUA website and articles in the UU World magazine. Ours is an important faith tradition that is often among the vanguard of on social justice movements. And if you ever doubt the need for our progressive faith in eastern Idaho, you should join us at our booth at the Pride celebrations in Rexburg or Idaho Falls. At both venues, I heard people thank us for showing up in support. And I heard sad stories of people who have been rejected and deeply hurt by their families or their church community simply because they're different from the accepted norms. We need to be the strong advocates and allies that our shared values call us to be. I can't speak with a certain prophetic vision about the future of our faith, but I can guarantee that it will be a process of ongoing transformation. We are not the same faith we were in the 1800s, 1900s, or even the early 2000s. We have evolved and will continue to do so to meet the needs of spiritual seekers in future times. And if you're anxious about the new Article 2 language, I understand. But like we sang in our opening hymn, don't be afraid of some change. It is a large part of who we are and who the world needs us to be. Well, now I'd like to, in an unusual thing, open up the floor for any questions or comments you might have about General Assembly or the Article 2 language. A lot of churches, just in case you haven't experienced them, will do this every Sunday, but I find it very tedious in those churches. I've done it in some of the Massachusetts churches, and can go on, and people have their own agendas. But today I wanted to give chance for people who might have questions. So I'll just stop talking. Anyone have anything to ask or share? Well, there's 4 copies on the table of the whole service day, and it's got the text in there if you want that. It's also out there on various links if you just go to the UA website and follow the paths. But if you've ever experienced the way we change language in the bylaws, it's a very tedious process of wordsmithing by committee, which is never easy to do if you've ever experienced that. And so we have many assemblies where people propose debates and amendments and things like that, and then eventually it gets voted on as amendments to the language of the actual bylaws. And then, like I said, in this case, if you're changing the bylaws, it takes 2 votes, one year to move it forward for the vote the second year. So that was what happened this year. So it's I think it was 80.2 versus 19.8. Yeah, it required a 2/3 threshold, so we greatly exceeded that. And of course, that only represents, the 2,757, I believe, was delegates, but they are representing congregations across the country. So, it doesn't go to a full vote of all Unitarian Universalists, which is somewhere between 150 and 200,000 members across all of our congregations. There's about just over 1,000 congregations right now, so 738 were represented, which is pretty good, percentage. And it was all 50 states and Washington, D.C., so that's also good that we saw that this year. So usually the in-person GAs in the past, you'd only have kind of a regional representation, and it's kind of skewed the results sometimes, whether it was in the east or the middle or the west. And so next year the GA will be in person in Baltimore. Not the most exciting city to visit, but it's close to D.C., so there's plenty to do. So I'm planning to go to the Baltimore GA because it is a very different experience. Because we have what we call ministry days before and then General Assembly. So we have meetings, the UU Ministers Association. So there's lots of nice workshops and chances to meet up with colleagues. And so in the energy in the worship services when it's in person is just phenomenal. I tell people, if you ever want to experience what a UU mega church would be like if we had such things, go to General Assembly, because you'll have 2,000 or 3,000 people in the worship service, which is very unusual. Our largest church, we have a few congregations that are over 1,000 members, but only a handful, and not around here, that's for sure. We're kind of on our own out here. But anything else? Questions, thoughts? Yep. So each church, I'll start with the delegate question. So each congregation that's a member of the UA has at least 2 delegates at large, plus the minister, any ministers emeritus, emeriti, I guess, and, or religious educators, all are automatically given delegate status. So this year I was the only delegate from the church, just turned out that way. But we could have had... with Lynn, yeah. I don't know if Lynn was there or voted. I never saw her name come across any of it's hard when it's online like that to see who's out there. But so Lynn Stanglin, Cameron Stanglin, sorry, I always get them reversed. She would have had a minister emerita delegate vote as well, but we didn't have any at-large people who signed up to do it. They've changed the rules a bit. In the past, it was very expensive to travel to GA and do all this and sign up, registration, all that. But now the voting delegates can do it with just a donation from the church to TBD, so you can sign up for the business-only option. And so like I said, so you get at least 2 delegates, but then it's based on numbers of members. So the big churches will have more delegates at large than the small churches. So we qualify for only 2 here, given our size. But if you're the Portland, Oregon church, for instance, I'm sure they had like 10 delegates or something. It's based on the numbers of people. Then, as far as the organization, is that your other question about the UA? So we have an elected president who's now serving one term, Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, who's our current president. And then we have a board of directors, or board of trustees, it's actually called, which are also elected for different years, and they're kind of staggered in their terms. And so and then there's all sorts of executive positions like vice presidents and various people in charge of denominational affairs or spiritual development, things like that. So there's a staff in the EUA headquarters in Boston, which is now at Farnsworth Street, not Beacon Hill anymore. And so you have, professional employees who are paid from the president on down, but then you have the volunteer board of trustees, and then you have moderators, which are also a volunteer position, that are which run the actual General Assembly. So we had 2 co-moderators this year who run the business and call things to order and follow the Robert's Rules of Order and that sort of thing. So it's very much a typical business meeting. You have a parliamentarian who they'll go to on questions where there's a question of procedure or whatever. And so when they open it up for discussion, they'll have a pro mic, a con mic, and a procedural mic so that people can come and ask questions. And they'll go back and forth and let the delegates speak at the pro or con mic. And you have to be a delegate with identify who you are, where you're from, et cetera. So, like I said, it's very much like if you go to any kind of convention that's voting, or like the Democratic Party or Republicans or whatever. And so there'll be all kinds of business issues and reports presented. And then the difference, which you'll see because we're a religious organization, is we have times where there'll be hymn singing or readings and so forth, in addition to scheduled worship services during the whole time on each day. Special service of the Living Tradition, for instance, where they honor people becoming fellowship as ministers and retirees and deaths. They have the synergy worship, which is the bridging between youth and young adults, so people get to introduce themselves who are graduating high school. We have now there's a blue worship with the Black Lives of UU sponsors a worship service, and then you'll have kind of mini worship services from the UU Buddhists or UU Christians and so forth during the week as well. So, and then lots of workshops. This year, all the workshops were pre-recorded and they're online for people who registered for the event. So there's all kinds of topics out there, people discussing everything from, church finances and growing small congregations to spiritual topics and, social justice, you name it. So it's very interesting to go to. Like I said, it's much more energetic and fun, I think, is the word I'd use, to be in person. The last in person I went to was in Portland, Oregon, and that was pretty good. But that was during COVID, so everybody's having to mask up and everything, so it was a little weird. But it is nice to do that, and so I'm looking forward to hopefully going to Baltimore next summer. But it's always toward the end of June. So this year, like all years, it conflicts with Pride. And so, fortunately, being recorded, I could go see it anytime I wanted to. But I was sitting at our booth at one of the Prides, watching the debate a little bit on the general session about the Article 2 language. So it was kind of interesting to see people's opinions. Some people had very strong pro or con opinions about this, and there was a big movement to what they call save our 7 principles, that people who really wanted to keep the language as is. And as you can see, it's a lot more wordy than the language of our 7 principles. So, there's some honest criticism you could level there that it's not as snappy as our existing principles, but it is what it is, and we have the democratic process, and we have voted overwhelmingly to approve the new language. So that's what it is. It doesn't prevent you from continuing to use the 7 principles in whatever way you want. So, any other questions? Or?
I don't see anything in here about democracy or the use of the democratic process.
There is one phrase. I'm trying. It was under. Oh, in the graphic, I think it's under the. Let's see, it's. Where is it? Maybe. Yeah, and yeah, and that's the kind of thing that was debated a lot. Like I said, the process spanned 4 years, and so people, there's all kinds of amendments offered to add things back or even add new petals to the flower for things like, if you felt strongly about democracy need to be a petal. There were things like that offered, but they were voted down ultimately in amendments. There is some language under one of them. I can't find it just glancing at it, but it mentions the democratic process. So it's baked in and kind of assumed, but that is a good point. The old principles did call out the use of the democratic process as one of our 7 principles we affirmed. So for whatever reason, that one didn't make it into a petal or being specifically singled out. It felt like it was included in one of the other categories. So, but that was common. People were really there was a lot of discussion about reason, the word reason being in there, and so that made it back into the language. But originally, it was not found anywhere. I am excited that this new set of language includes love several times. Our old 7 principles did not mention the word love a single time, or beloved community. And so I've always thought that was a shortcoming from the 1987 language. But I'm glad to see it in here. But I was expecting them to just kind of tweak the 7 principles when they originally set this up, and perhaps add the 8th principle that we voted on as a congregation about racial discrimination and systems of oppression. But that kind of all got rolled into the new set of values. So, like I said, it was a democratic process to create the document. So, is under the justice one? Yeah, the bookmarks that we have, and I hope everybody will take one or more. I think I've got 50 of them over there. Have the values in kind of shorthand form, which is probably better than the original text. It is under justice. It says, we support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions within our congregations, our association, and society at large. So that's kind of in the same vein as the original 7th principle with was that the 4th principle? I can't remember which number it was. Talks about the use of the democratic process. So that's very similar, but it's under the justice pedal in our values now. Any other thoughts or questions? I can't believe this is a UU congregation. Usually there's more opinions than there are people in the pews. But so like I said, anytime you feel that you want to talk about this some more, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, or like I said, look at the UUA websites and see what's out there. And I'm sure the UU World magazine online or in paper, I don't know if we're even printing it anymore. I think we are, but it only comes out quarterly now, I think. And so there's going to be lots and lots of articles, I'm sure, and lots of letters to the editor and so forth about this going forward. So, all right. Well, then, seeing no more hands, I'll call this. I'll call the meeting. A lot of gavel clapping at this at the General Assembly. So if you like procedure and want to see things like that, you'll really love it if you're a policy wonk type person. So I'll invite everyone to again rise in body or spirit now and join in singing our closing hymn, number 108, "My Life Flows On, an Endless Song."
It's
Our closing words are from the Reverend Vincent B. Silliman. Let religion be to us life and joy. Let it be a voice of renewing challenge to the best we have and may be. Let it be a call to generous action. Let religion be to us a dissatisfaction with things that are, which bids us to serve more eagerly the true and right. Let it be the sorrow that opens us the way to sympathy, understanding, and service to suffering humanity. Let religion be to us the wonder and lure of that which is only partly known and understood. An eye that glories in nature's majesty and beauty, and a heart that rejoices in deeds of kindness and courage. Let religion be to us security and serenity because of its truth and beauty, and because of the enduring worth and power of the loyalties which it engenders. Let it be to us hope and purpose, and a discovering of opportunities to express our best through daily tasks. Religion uniting us with all that is admirable in human beings everywhere, holding before our eyes a prospect of the better life for humankind, which each may help to make actual.
We will now extinguish our chalice with the following words. If you wish, feel free to join me in reciting them.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.